Hello and welcome everyone. We'll be looking at dietary assessment methods in epidemiology studies in just a brief overview as part of this lecture or tutorial. So this is a continuation from the guest lecture which you had with Professor Demos and which spoke about measuring dietary patterns and in which the particular focus was on measuring Mediterranean dietary patterns using the Mediterranean dietary indexes and scores which have been created by Professor Demos and his research group. So this has been covered well in detail from epidemiological perspective with the guest lecture by Professor Demos. And in this lecture, we'll be looking at a few objective and subjective measures of dietary assessment, just a brief overview. As I appreciate, our epidemiology unit is not nutritional epidemiology, but this is just a brief insight, which is a continuation from your guest lecture with Professor Demos on dietary patterns and epidemiological studies. All right, so yes, the dietary assessment methods in epidemiology. So firstly, in very basic terms, diet, it consists of both, which is your beverages and food, which is solid and liquid food items, and from which an individual derives nutrients and which are used for body's needs and functions. All right, so diet, it can be divided or it can be examined at various levels, and depending upon the various levels, different type of research questions can be created. From a research point of view, diet can be examined for its total energy intake, or also called as total kilocal intake, or specifically for its macronutrients, which are carbohydrate, protein, fat, and or your micronutrients such as your water soluble and your fat soluble and your minerals. Or else diet can be examined in terms of consumption of individual food and food groups, which are your, say, the 5 basic food groups as per the Australian Guides to Healthy Eating. Or dietary patterns can be examined, such as the Mediterranean dietary pattern, which was discussed in detail in the guest lecture. And then dietary behaviors can be examined, and dietary behaviors is an area which I research considerably into. For instance, I look into children's eating behavior, such as fussy eating, picky eating, and what are its implications on the child's, say, weight status and on the nutritional quality that the child is consuming, so on and so forth. So that is part of dietary behaviors. All right. So yes, as dietary research is definitely complex and it is influenced by several factors which are at various levels. So from a micro to macro environmental levels, factors can influence dietary patterns and consumption. And therefore, it makes it particularly challenging to measure. For example, availability, accessibility to food, affordability of food, personal individual food preferences and choices, genetic influences on diet, all of these factors can influence dietary research. Right. So, yes, so dietary research questions are a few examples have been provided over here, but they are not just limited to this few domains or examples of dietary research. So, one of the key area of research in, say, dietary research or nutritional epidemiology is to examine the link between diet disease, for instance, iron supplementation and its impact on cognition, or say folic acid supplementation and its impact on neural tube defect prevalences. All right, so diet disease relationship. Secondly, adequacy in terms of individual consumption and versus population consumption. Individual consumption is what we have done a lot in, say, the research which I do, where I look at children's consumption and how this is impacting their nutritional status and health. Population level, epidemiological level dietary consumption data is also gathered, and also gathered in Australia. For instance, in Australia, we can say that yes, say only 1% of children are meeting their fruit and vegetable intake. Where did we get this information from? Population level dietary assessment. All right, then detecting changes over time. So yes, dietary data can be examined from a longitudinal point of view or from a prospective point of view. This could be, for example, say the impact of iron supplementation on Alzheimer's, the one which I have given, and that would be, say, a negative, say, a connotation, because what research has shown is that iron supplementation can cause iron toxicity in the brain cells, ferroptosis is what it is called scientifically, which then has impact on mental health, such as Alzheimer's. But on the other side, you can also investigate with prospective or longitudinal studies the impact of coconut oil on Alzheimer's, because a lot of current research, but these are individual researches, not level one evidence, they are showing the impact of coconut oil consumption on improving the cognition and memory, span and levels among Alzheimer disease patients. So yes, these are the type of say prospective changes, dietary changes over time and its implication on health and disease. All right, then behavioral determinants of diet can be examined, and this is something which I examine in my current research, where I look at the environmental determinants of fussy eating, such as how mothers are feeding their children and is this making them more of a fussy eater. So the environmental causes of fussy eating, but I also look at the genetic or biological causes of fussy eating, such as the child being a super taster. A super taster is someone who will find foods much more bitter than they actually are. All right, and that is because of their phenotype variability. So I'm examining this sort of research, which is a nexus between environment and genetics. Okay, so basically, yes, these are the say big research domains in dietary say research, but of course they are not just limited to these. Then dietary adequacy and nutritional requirements. Sorry, students, this slide, which is their dietary adequacy and nutritional requirements, this is an activity slide, and the activities I have all pasted together at the bottom of this presentation. And this is where the slide should be, because you will have the opportunity to examine your own dietary adequacy, whether your diet is adequate in the 5 food groups, for instance, or not, and whether you are meeting your nutritional requirements, or what are your nutritional requirements, especially when you have students who are not, say, studying nutrition, but they are in the wider health faculty. This gives you a brief overview about the various sort of, say, um, population level simple calculators and tools which are out there, from which even a lay person can calculate their own nutritional requirement, dietary adequacy, so on and so forth. So this is part of a activity for the tutorial, and I'll make sure to include this slide at the end, because that's referring to the activity which you have to do. Right, then you have the concept of dietary variation and misreporting. So dietary variation is considering two factors: variation between individuals and variation within the same individual. So meaning what I have eaten today, how is it varied from what I have eaten yesterday and what I'll be eating tomorrow. Okay, so that is within individual variability. Between individual variation is for say individuals of my demographic, of my age group, gender, socioeconomic class, strata, or however you want to classify it. In this say age group, or this demographic of people who have similar socio-demographic characteristics, how varied is their diet. Okay, so it is looking at individuals from the same demographic, which can be comparable then. All right, so basically within and between individual variation can be examined in epidemiology by various methods. Okay, the one method which I'm showing you is coefficient of variation. All right, but please remember that is not the only method. There are many other methods out there. I just want to flag to you one of the method, because as I appreciate, this unit is not about, say, investigating nutritional epidemiology in depth, but this is, say, opening an avenue to you. So you know that there is a array of nutritional epidemiology, just like how we had clinical epidemiology, in which we looked at sensitivity and specificity, which are the key, say, tools which are used in, say, clinical screening and used in clinical epidemiology. So this is also just a snapshot in a similar manner. All right. Okay. So within and between individual variation, which is examined by coefficient of variance. So if you see this row, coefficient of variance, W stands for within individual variation. Okay. So within the same individual, whereas the B stands for between individual variation. As you can see, the between individual variation is much less. So it is for the similar demographic cohort, versus within individual, which has a high variability. All right, so yes, this partly explain, which is written over here, why the mean intake of group is usually more readily assessed than individual, because there is less variation when you're comparing individuals of similar cohort and characteristics. The variation is lesser compared to just one individual and variation within the same individual. Okay, of course, it depends upon your research question, whether your focus is within or between dietary changes. That will determine what sort of variation is your, say, point of attention. But yes, in just generic epidemiology term, to minimize the variability or say variance, you would be choosing between individual variation if that is not a key consideration in your research. Okay, just to minimize variability. All right, so this is the example of fat which I wanted to share with you, the within and the between. All right. Okay, but do remember that dietary variation can be measured by other methods. This is one of them, which is shown. Okay, then factors which are influencing dietary variation, a lot of things can influence why an individual may eat differently from today to tomorrow to, what he had yesterday, or why there is variation between group of similar cohort. All right, and this could be of various things. For example, seasonal variation, variation in meal patterns. Yes, I may be of a similar cohort, but I come from a different ethnic background, and therefore my dietary pattern would be highly varied from, say, the general Caucasian Australian population. Makes sense? Okay, so variation in meal pattern could have various reasons. Then variation in household consumption, availability of food, the range of food which is available, accessibility, affordability, also consumption of foods outside home, working patterns, festivities, and the disease state that the individual may be experiencing. All right, so many factors determine individual variation. And basically, the main take home message from this, students, is that even if my research question is, for example, to see if dietary iron intake has an impact on cognition level of individuals, I would collect data on as many other potential confounding variables as possible for me to control in my analysis. So I can say, irrespective of this variation, there still exists a relationship between dietary iron intake and cognition levels in individuals. For me to make this statement, I'll have to collect data on all of these variable components so that I can control them or adjust them in my analysis, or deal with them in the most, say, rigorous and scientific manner statistically. Okay, so I hope you understand why these factors are important, because the more knowledge you have regarding the factors which are influencing your research question, you then have to collect data on these factors, and this remains constant for irrespective which field you are in. Okay, it's not just nutrition. All right, so yes, and then those factors are the ones which you can control in your analysis, or else you can find, say, mediation or moderation, interactive relationship with those factors. So all of this is possible only if you have data collected on those factors. Okay. All right. So then you have accounting for dietary variation, both the within and between individual variation. These are natural phenomena. As I said, the factors which we discussed, so many things are beyond your control, like seasonal variation, affordability. What if I just can't afford, say, something really fancy, like having, say, avocado every day or something like that? No, it can get pretty pricey at times. Okay. So yes, so basically these are natural phenomena, a lot of factors which are influencing an individual's dietary variation within or between. All right, one thing which has been shown to be highly effective, and not just highly effective, but scientifically highly effective by minimizing, say, type 2 error, is increasing the sample size. So dietary studies on an epidemiological level, they have very, very large sample size to minimize this between and within individual variation. Okay. So then you have misreporting. What is misreporting? This is a big, say, bias which we see in dietary studies. So misreporting is in a form of, say, respondent bias, and this includes both overreporting and underreporting. For instance, the biggest thing which you see in research, for example, individuals will overreport their height and they will underreport their weight. Similarly, they will overreport the healthy foods that they are eating, and they will underreport the junk food that they are eating, in simple terms. Okay. So yes, implications of misreporting, which I said over here, that estimates of different food intake are affected differently. So basically, you're not getting accurate estimates because things are over or underreported, and this can have implications on your findings and take home messages. All right. Then it is difficult to, if you do not have, say, an accurate, say, dietary estimation, then what this leads to, you cannot really compare this to reference benchmarks like, say, food guidelines, or even support this data to form food guidelines and nutritional guidelines, because this data could be quite inaccurate to begin with. Okay, and it weakens any diet disease relationship, meaning as a researcher, you truly want to see whether, say red meat consumption is having an impact on cancer, colorectal cancer. But because individuals have, say, over or underreported their dietary data, it is not very precise, not very accurate, and therefore this can weaken your relationship. You may not see any significant relationship between red meat and cancer, or else if you see one, maybe that is, type 1 error or something. Okay, so that's why misreporting is a big concern in, say, nutritional epidemiological research. So how do you address misreporting? A lot of the times, especially in cross-sectional study, when you have limited resources in terms of time, money, labor, energy, then you have to just acknowledge. For example, you may do a 24-hour dietary recall. You know that a 24-hour dietary recall, it could be inaccurate because an individual may want to, say, over-report their healthy foods, under-report their junk food intake. So you can't really do much about it, rather than just acknowledge it in the limitation section if you are, say, constricted with resources. But of course, there are other ways of, say, making sure that your data is more accurate and reliable, and that would be by comparing participants self-reported data to researchers measured dietary data, such as weighed food measures. Okay, what are weighed food measures? We'll look at that in the dietary assessment methods. But basically this is one of the way of addressing self-reporting, or yeah, self-reporting error, which is you have taken the individual's dietary intake from their perspective, then you have measured the individual's dietary intake, and then it helps you to compare and cross validate and check whether what they have reported is accurate or not. Okay. The other way of doing it, which is more technical, and may not be possible in all research questions and study, is comparing total energy intake to total energy expenditure, on and that also on a regular basis, not on a one-off basis. And for participants whose weight is static, meaning they're not having a growth spurt where they suddenly feel hungry, or a pregnancy or things like that, but where their weight is quite static for a considerable number of years, then you are comparing habitual dietary patterns, energy intake versus expenditure. Okay, but yeah, the most common tool which is done when studies are well funded and well resourced and good quality studies, they compare participants' reported data to the researchers' data. Okay. All right. So now we go to dietary assessment methods. Subjective. There are two types of dietary assessment methods, and as I said, this lecture is very brief. It's just an overview, so don't worry. Not bombarding you with nutritional epidemiology knowledge. All right. So roughly speaking, dietary assessment methods can be divided into subjective methods and objective methods. All right. So subjective methods, over here, it is where the researcher is collecting data. You know how I said I collect data? It is not the participants who is just writing something and giving to me. Okay, so yes, a subjective methods uses responses from a participant to estimate their, say, aspects of diet and nutrient intake, so on and so forth. Okay, so yes, but I'll be collecting the data. All right, but the issue over here is, oh, I'm so sorry. I got confused between subjective and objective methods. In subjective methods, my apology, you are asking the participants to report their, say, dietary intake data. Okay, so that is subjective. Yes, objective, as the term suggests, is much more accurate because it is an objective measure. Sorry about that, students. So yes, subjective methods is when you are asking the participants to self-report their dietary data. So it could be a 24-hour recall or a food frequency questionnaire. So yes, this is an affordable method, easy to use, non-invasive, and it is also not that time consuming as objective methods are. It is suitable certainly for large studies because it has less respondent burden as a researcher. Yes, it would have, say, some level of participant burden, definitely, because they are the one who are completing the questionnaire, and it has flexible means of implementation, that is definitely there. You can have online questionnaires, food frequency questionnaires, and therefore large, say, data collection is possible. Large sample size is possible with subjective measures. Okay. Let me share this example with you. So you know how I said that my principal area of research at the moment is looking at children's picky eating behavior. So in this picky eating behavior study, I have asked the moms and the children to complete a, say, children's diet quality questionnaire, which say is sort of a food frequency questionnaire asking what the child has had in 24 hours, in the last 7 days, things like that. Okay. And that is done on a very large sample size. So I have asked around 478 moms and children to complete this up. All right. And yes, even children's, because they are 7 to 12 years of age, so there are certain things which the children can complete. It is in their cognitive capacity, so only those things the children are completing. All right, so yes, that is your say subjective measure, which is done on a very large sample size, and it was say very affordable because it was all online, and it was less say researcher burden on my end in terms of cost and effectiveness, easy to use, obviously no invasion, no all of that. So that was all good. Then to just share with you the objective measure, what I did was I took a subgroup of these 478 say moms and children. Okay, so these were just around 30 because I just didn't have the capacity to anymore. It was very time consuming. I went to their houses, obviously after ethics clearance and all of that. Okay, so I went to their houses and I then recorded what they were having. Okay, so I actually, with observational methods, I tried to see, okay, this is the type of food they're having, this is the amount of food they're having, this is their regular day food they're having. And then this helped me to compare what they have reported. Is this sort of similar to their regular dietary patterns, or is this something completely way off? Okay. So this is what I'm saying, that your objective methods, they help to say validate your subjective methods. All right. So it improves the accuracy of the dietary data which you are collecting. So yes, now we come to objective methods, and which is where I got confused between objective and subjective. So in objective method, it is the researcher which is collecting the data, the dietary data. All right. And this could be say, and there are various methods of doing this, but yeah, the main thing is over here, there is minimal respondent bias. All right, meaning what the participants are reporting, because you're actually observing what foods they are eating, or else you're measuring and weighing what foods they are eating. So yes, there is more, you have more control over the measurement techniques. Okay, as a researcher. So yes, so there is minimum respondent bias in terms of say recall errors and social desirability bias, meaning like oh, they are reporting healthy foods more because they are part of a study and they want to look good. Okay, no, it's not that. All right. Then yes, it provides it relatively provides accurate measures of dietary say assessment compared to your subjective methods, and as I said, often used to validate the subjective methods. Absolutely, they can be quite costly because going at everybody's houses, even labor intensive to get the special ethics clearance for this, and time consuming. I couldn't do more than means what I did, and they are definitely not suitable for large epidemiological studies. I only did a small subsample so that I can validate my subjective methods, but by no means I can do this for 478 moms and children. That's impossible. Okay. And yes, they definitely require specialized training because you need to learn how to weigh those foods accurately, to have a non-biased observational technique and approaches. So yes, it definitely does require specialized training. Okay, and to use calibrated tools, weighing tools, and so on and so forth, scales and things. Okay, so now as I have said that you don't need to go in the nitty-gritties of the dietary methods, but this is useful for you to know that objective methods include, for example, duplicate diet approach and food consumption approach. So, food consumption record. So what is duplicate diet approach? Let me share this with you. So this is what I did in the urban slums of Mumbai when I was a postgraduate student, just like you, which is like a billion years back. But still, there was once a time. So at that time, when I was in India, we went to the urban slums of Mumbai for repeated number of days. Okay, so it was probably say we had food samples for weekdays and weekends to see if there is a say big change between weekend foods versus weekday foods, things like that. And we took food samples, so say a food sample, so like we used to take a sample of rice, sample of lentil, whatever they were consuming. Okay, and then we actually say analyzed it in the laboratory for the macronutrient and the micronutrient profile they had. Of course, we also measured and then we did the second method also, which is food consumption record. So what is food consumption record? Where we actually measured all the food that they were eating. So they were, for an individual in the household, they were having, for example, 250 ml, 1 cup of lentil, and say half a cup of rice, or so on and so forth. So all of those foods were measured, and again the weighment took place just not on one day but on repeated number of days. All right. So yes, this becomes really, it's a very convenient tool, food consumption record and duplicate diet approaches, when you're doing this in a population which has low levels of literacy or understanding, uh, or say means to support your work, whereas you just have to go in and you have to do all of that, but they are not suitable for large epidemiological studies. But there is one thing which you have to be mindful, students, is that especially, for example, in India, doing research, you can get a lot of labor resources, like say research assistant and community worker resources, for a subsidized cost. So basically, these sort of highly rigorous objective measures, which are very tedious and pedantic, they can be applied on a larger scale. Okay, so for instance, we were, say, just uni students, we were funded by the UNICEF. This was a UNICEF funded project, and the entire class was doing this project. So there were, say, 60 odd students or so, and all of us were devoted in doing this project. And we collected a numerous sample size. It was, I think, more than 15,000 participants or so. So it was definitely an epidemiological level study. But again, sort of possible, say, in a developing countries where the resources are much more subsidized. So yes, this was possible, but that is what I'm saying, these are exceptional cases. Otherwise, me doing research over here now, for the last 10 years that I'm in Australia, I just can't fathom doing something like this at an epidemiological scale. I mean, it's just so impractical. I don't have the means, I don't have the labor or the finances. So yes, these are suited for smaller studies. They are quite accurate and rigorous, especially to, say, validate your subjective measurements. Uh, but yes, yeah, it has its own flaws in terms of time, labor, training, all of that. All right, so I hope this makes some sense. This food consumption record is also called as weighed food measurement records. All right, okay. Then we have, oh yes, and I just want to highlight the, if you see this point, measurement of dietary exposure possible, environmental contaminants, so on and so forth. So the food samples which we had collected, um, my first master's was in food science. So in food science, that is what I did, like, analysis of the carbohydrate, protein, fat, and micronutrients and all of that in the laboratory. But the water which was used for cooking and things like that, we had sent that off to another laboratory which assesses the water for any sort of environmental contaminants. And there were certain sections of the slum area which were close to, say, open gutters and things like that. And they had contaminated water which was used for cooking. Okay. And it was not, say, boiled to certain extent or things like that, where it can be, say, sterilized. No, so yes, contaminated water was used, and which was one of the determinants of why children in those households were undernourished. Okay, so they were having, say, frequent bouts of diarrhea, and say some of them were suffering from pneumonia. They were stunted, underweight, so on and so forth. And one of the reason being contaminated water used for cooking, and the entire family having it. But as you will appreciate, children being more susceptible than the adults. Okay, so that is what I wanted to highlight, that this is certainly possible using duplicate diet approaches. All right, then the other four methods which you have over here, they are your subjective methods of assessment. I'm so sorry, I don't know why I keep swapping between subjective objective today. My bad. But yes, so these two are your objective ones, duplicate diet and food consumption. These 424 dietary, diet history, all of these are your subjective methods. Okay, so 24-hour dietary recall, I think almost all of you would be knowing what a 24-hour dietary recall is. And with 24-hour dietary recall, you can do this over a number of days as well. So for instance, you do it, say, 2 weekdays and 1 weekend. So that is possible. You can do multiple days of dietary recall. But of course, as the name suggests, it's recall. Okay, so it has a lot of recall, recall errors, and it has respondent bias because for instance, and I'll share, that was for dietary record, but I'll share with you one more example. Sorry, this is my field, so I like have a billion examples, but I think this will help your learning. So it's not that I'm just yapping away stories which are not like related to your studies. So don't worry, I'm not doing that. Okay, but yeah, so 24-hour dietary recall, it has say it is subjected to a lot of biases. All right, and you can also have possible interview biases, because 24-hour dietary recall, how it can be done is also when a participant is sitting in front of you and you're asking them what did you have in the last 24 hours, and you're noting it down. And sometimes some community workers, when they are not trained well, they may try to give hints and props to complete the data collection quickly. So they were like, oh, maybe you had this, and then the person is like, oh yes, yeah, yeah, I think I did have that, yeah. But that's not how you collect dietary data. All right, so yes, of course it has its advantages, which we mentioned earlier. All of these methods, they are very cost effective, time effective, labor effective, non-invasive, absolutely. But it has a lot of errors. All right, it has respondent biases, social desirability biases, recall biases, interviewer biases. All right, so it comes with its pros and cons. But yes, big studies which are well funded, they generally try to have, say, if they have 24-hour dietary recall, they will try to do the food consumption record with a subset of participants. Okay, so this is something like what I did in my research. I did food frequency and I did the food consumption record partly. Okay. Then you have dietary record. So in dietary record is where you are asking the participant to maintain sort of a say food diary. All right. So where you can again have say 3 weekdays and one weekend or something like that. Again, very high respondent burden. And a lot of the time these food diaries, they come out to be half empty. Because they forget to write in, and then they forget what they had eaten, and then they don't they find it, they feel it's such a time waste to write these things. But let me share with you an example of a dietary record. So when I was in Emory University, which is in Atlanta, United States, when I was doing my postdoc in nutrition genetics, we had we used to organize a metabolic camp. So metabolic camp for genetic diseases, nutrition related genetic diseases. So one of the disease being phenylketonuria, all right, which is more prevalent than the other nutrition related genetic diseases in reference to protein. So in this, we used to ask the participants to complete a 3-day food record diary, and then to bring that diary. All right. So when they used to bring that diary, it was not that it was really empty. They were good in completing the diary, but if you see, they would have the most wonderful, perfect diaries possible. Like even I don't eat that healthy sometimes, I feel. So they had like these amazing fruits and veggies and this salad and whatever stuff. And then they are with you in this camp for 1 week. Okay, so it's a 1 week metabolic camp. So they are all the week they are with you, they stay with you. So it's like, lodging, boarding, all of this is provided. So it is a well funded program at Emory University. And then because they are with you for 1 week, and you see actually what they are eating. Okay, and with observational recording, you can record that with ethics clearance. Don't worry, it's not that we were spying on them or anything. But yes, so we did record all of those information with observational set techniques. And it was so shocking to see what they actually eat in the camp. And it really makes you worry that are these dietary record accurate, because you don't see, you always have that stack of fruit and veggie or whatever salad which is just untouched, which is just lying over there. All the other foods are completed, the pastas, the gravies, the meat, all of that is gone, and this is just lying over there. So I'm like, if you are eating so healthy at home, what's happening? Like, and it's an entire week. It's not like yes, you're out, you feel like you're in a holiday mood and you are just having these things, for a couple of days. But no, it was the entire week. This dietary pattern was consistent. And then we used to club the dietary record method with the observational methods for more accurate, safe findings. Diet history has a lot of recall biases. It is like they ask your diet history, from instance, what you used to eat when you were a child. This is generally done for, say, cases or participants or patients who have allergies, for instance, and they need to be put on an elimination diet. All right. So if there are, say, allergies, food intolerances, they may ask, what you have eaten in childhood, what type of foods, what type of symptoms you experience, and similarly then going to adolescence and then adulthood now. So yes, diet history can be say a retrospective recollection from any time point forward. Okay, so absolutely, it is a high respondent burden, and it is not really quite accurate data. All right, and high cost and time consuming, definitely high cost. It again depends upon in which scenario you're doing. Of course, you can't do this for a big say study, like for 400 or 5,000 participants. You just can't do this sort of diet history. That's not practical. For that big level of participants, what is practical is food frequency questionnaire for short, to some extent 24-hour, but food frequency questionnaire is what is actually used for a very, very big epidemiological study. Diet history is not practical, not really accurate, but it has its own advantages, especially if you're dealing with very unique participant population, like, as I said, allergies and intolerances or something like that. Okay. And because the recall is over a relatively long period of time, like 6 months, or even right from your childhood. Then you have food frequency questionnaire, and this a lot of you must have heard. There are a lot of validated food frequency questionnaire for adults, for children, for ethnic populations. Yes, it has a less respondent burden, and definitely it has its own recall biases, because they may ask you which type of veggies you did you have in the last 7 days, and some may remember, some may not remember. So of course you always have that reporting error, self-reporting error, and but it is used in large epidemiological studies. All right, and absolutely cost effective. And all of these methods, such as food frequency, 24-hour, these can be applied online, face to face, hard copy, soft copy, so that is not an issue. All right, but yes, this basically gives you an overview regarding your two objective methods, most common one, and the four subjective methods. But please be mindful, these are not the only methods out there. These are the most common ones, but there are many, many more which we haven't covered. But of course, I do appreciate this class is not nutritional epidemiology. All right, you're not majoring in that. This is just an overview of epidemiology at its whole. Therefore, just have you had a brief glance, one of your lecture, which was on sensitivity, specificity, clinical epidemiology. Similarly, now you have a brief insight into nutritional epidemiology. Okay. So yes, now these are the activities for you if you're interested, and I would highly encourage you to do it. These are fun activities and it will help you to know more about your diet, especially being not a nutrition student. It gives you an insight into what you're eating and how is it. Okay, so for instance, the first one is to know the number of serves of the 5 food groups that you should be having for your age, for your gender, so on and so forth. Okay, so for instance, the 5 food groups includes the fruit, veggies, cereal, meats, proteins, all of those. Okay, so yes, this is the reference to that. This is from Australian Guides to Healthy Eating. So see what see your food serves that you should be, food groups that you should be having, and the number of say serves in the food group that you should be having per day. Okay, so look at your dietary adequacy. So do you think you are having this much, or are you having less, more? What is it? Okay, so check your dietary adequacy. Then check your nutritional requirement. Again, these are simple calculators. This helps you to calculate your daily energy requirement in kilojoules. And I think there is an option for kilocals, but in Australia, you use kilojoules anyways. Okay. So, yep. So, what is your caloric requirement? How much you should be, say, consuming? And the second one reports your macronutrient requirements. Okay. So, your micronutrients meaning how much of fiber you should be having in a day, iron and vitamin A and things like that. Okay, so this will give you an insight for your age and for your gender. Okay, and this is your overall health diet score. Okay, just like how you have your Mediterranean diet index, this is a CSIRO designed healthy diet score, which gives you an insight whether what you're having on regular days is this overall healthy or not. Okay, and if it is not healthy, it also gives you suggestion as to you're not having enough fruit in the day, so this is what you should be say focusing on. You're not having enough dairy in the day, so that is what you should be focusing on. Or else you're having too many non-core foods, which is like junk foods. Okay, so it gives you a good healthy diet score, like 60%, 80%, what is it? So it's a well validated, well used score developed by CSIRO. The only thing it asks for your email ID, the other tools they don't, the other ones which I showed you. So if you're comfortable sharing your email ID, but obviously with CSIRO, a well reputed body, it is not they are going to be spamming you with say bajillion emails and things like that, then do complete the health diet score. Even I have done it, and it gives you a good insight to know as to what is your diet like. Do you think you're eating healthy, and does the diet score also confirm that for you or not? Okay, so have a go and see how it is. So you see, such simplistic tools are made to gather, if they were doing a research study, which is to gather large population level data on basics of, say, like, what is the overall Australian population eating? Is it healthy? Is it unhealthy? Where do the dietary score stands at? Okay, so this is a classic and a very good example of nutritional epidemiology, of, say, nutritional assessment at a population level using a very simple tool that anybody can use. Like, this is developed for lay persons. So, of course, students like you who are in health sciences would be comfortable using this. Okay, so do have a go at this and see how you feel. All right, regarding your diet. So, yes, that's about it. So this is a very short and sweet tute, and it has very fun activities, lots of fun activities. So I hope you enjoy doing these activities and have a better insight into your diet. But yes, this is the last, say, recorded lecture from my end, accessible lecture, all right, for your exams. As you know, all of your guest lectures, they are not accessible, so that is all good. All right, so now you have sufficient time to prepare for your final assessment, so on and so forth. But yes, it has been a good journey teaching you, and I hope you have felt the same. And of course, I'll see you further on in, say, our online, say, blackboards and things like that. But yes, this is my, say, last recording. So I just wanted to give you a goodbye before I give you a goodbye in the live medium. All right, so yes, thank you for all of your time, and hopefully see you in your future research careers. Thank you. And yes, if you ever want to do a PhD, then do contact me if you want to do it in nutrition. Yeah. Thank you. See you.